Hey, hello, and welcome back to my AuthorTube channel. I'm Autumn Ashley, and today we are continuing on with outlining and brainstorming this new shiny idea. I've done a little bit of work since my last vlog, so I'm gonna catch you guys up with all of that stuff, as well as what we are going to be looking forward to in this vlog. As I'm filming today, it is Friday, April 1st, which is also the first day of camp, so happy Camp Nano if you are participating. I'm kind of participating loosely. We're just having fun with the month and the story. Let's jump into what I did after the vlog ended from last week and go from there. So for last week, I spent so many hours working on this story. Last Thursday, which was March 24th, and Friday, which was March 25th, I spent a total for those 2 days, lump sum, about 16 to 18 hours working on my story. What was I doing during that whole time? Because Autumn, that's a lot of time to be spending on a story and you don't have a complete draft yet. No, friends, there's no complete draft. However, there's a lot of progress that was made. So let's talk about the progress that I made. Those 2 days, I read through 2 of my writing craft books. Again, I've read through them. They were part of my TBR for the first quarter. I was putting some sticky notes as well as highlighting some parts in each of these. Save the Cat, not so much. That was what I just showed you. In Story Genius, I really tried to go through this again, especially part 2. Part 2 and part 3 are the 2 parts that I'm going to be focusing on, as well as going through Brandon Sanderson's lectures. I've listened to the first 3. The first 2 really, or lecture 2 and lecture 3, really focus on the introduction to story and plotting, which is what I'm currently working on. So I took some notes from his lectures online. I did leave them in the description box for the last video, but I'm gonna leave them again since I'm talking about it. But I really tried to focus on what he was talking about and taking some good, valuable notes. I think that they're valuable, at least to me. So I spent some time working on these. His lecture is beautiful. You should definitely go check it out. But some of my takeaways from his lectures, I was really trying to focus on the promises, the progress, and the payoff for the reader, for the writer, and for the story. Brandon Sanderson talked about his way of outlining. So I took notes on all of that, really tried to submerge myself into his lectures, and then tried to also go through Story Genius, highlighting some things. I spent a lot of time going through and putting a lot of this stuff in my notebook. We ended up stopping at 25 pages. We spent a lot of the time taking the questions from Story Genius and working on my main character and my main character's backstory. In Story Genius, she asks some questions and then has you do workshop questionnaires or whatever about your main character. So I really focused on my main character last week, her backstory, where she came from, asking a bunch of questions, trying to figure out who these people were also in her past and if they're going to be in her present. One thing that I remember from Brandon Sanderson's lectures, as well as Story Genius, and Save the Cat may have mentioned this as well, where your story, the actual novel, is taking place in the middle of a story, in the middle of a situation that was happening. Since I'm trying to pull some of my inspiration from The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue and The Hunger Games, I try to picture these stories and try to answer those questions relating to those stories to see, okay, how did this author deal with this situation? This situation being, it was taking place in the middle of a story. Let's just say The Hunger Games. It was in the middle of a story, but why was this particular scene and why was this beginning the most important for Katniss, and why was it the most important part of the story to start there? And the same with Addie LaRue, with where Addie LaRue started. Why was that the most important part? Because it was in the middle of a story of Addie's life, but why did the author choose that particular scene to start the story with? My whole point of saying that is I have written 6 scenes. I'm actually going to work on a 7th scene. It's been brewing. I'm going to talk about that in a second. I went through the 6 scenes that I wrote down, and I feel like one of those scenes would be a very strong beginning to the first chapter. I felt like it was a good starting point going off of the 2 stories that I draw inspiration from. When I go through what I want to work on this week, it will make sense as to what we did and then where we're headed. I have a good understanding of where I want my story to end. The middle is still fuzzy, but I have an idea of what I think I want to do to just briefly plot out the middle portion. And since the middle, to me, I always struggle with the middle. I usually have a pretty good understanding of where I want the story to start and somewhat of an ending. Just that middle part, it never works with me. So we want to try a different approach with that. I listened to an interview with V.E. Schwab. I think it's an older interview. I think it was an interview from like 2015, 2016. So I'm not quite sure if this is how she goes about her drafting, her plotting. I don't want to say it was plotting because she considers herself a connect the dotser, which is how I think I want to approach the middle part of my story. I just want to write down bullet points, key scenes for the middle, and then just kind of fill in as we go, potentially. That's not what we're going to be working on, just talking it all out with you guys. I think that's pretty much it. We worked on this, made a pretty good dent, 25 pages, took notes in Story Genius, noted some pages that I wanted to return to, and took notes and listened to Brandon Sanderson's lectures. We didn't do a whole lot of work with Save the Cat. I think this is going to come in handy once I'm trying to plot out and structure my story. But I did briefly go through this and noted some pages. I don't think we're quite here yet since I'm still building my characters, my world building, character arcs, the lore, and history. So we're still working on that. We haven't quite made it to putting everything, piecing it together into a structure. So what we're going to be working on today, and these are going to be in no particular order, but these are the things that we're going to be focusing on today and tomorrow. I need to work out the plot, work on my main character's character arc, as well as my secondary characters, build those characters, ask questions as to what they are going to do for my main character, how they're going to help push the story forward or maybe give us some setbacks, work on kind of character arcs for them depending on their importance to the story. I need to continue to world build. I need to focus on the government, the politics in this world, this competition that these characters are training for and slowly starting to work towards in the story. I need to get somewhat of the ending that's in my head. We need to plot that out. I think I want to write it down in here, bullet point method, work on the beginning as well, plot that out and see where we're gonna go. Let's finish Story Genius so we can finish taking all of our notes for Story Genius, and we're still going to continue to brainstorm some more ideas. I did talk about, I had a scene that as I was rereading those 6 scenes that I have written down, I had another scene pop up in my head where I wanted one of the scenes to pick up from, just to briefly talk about this story, just a tidbit to kind of make sense. The last scene that I wrote, these characters were entering into a tavern. They got separated, but the main character just thought that they got separated because this character was going to go cause some trouble, steal some souls, all that fun stuff. But come to find out, the tavern has a magical barrier. This character entered in and wasn't quite supposed to kind of break through. So that character is now disappeared, and I have a good idea of where I want the rest of that scene or this next scene, scene 7, to go. So I want to write how that goes. We need to plot out the main plot of the story. We need to focus on that. I have a couple of subplots that I want to work on, but other than that, I'm not going to spend too much time working on subplots because I feel like as I discovery write and I continue to work on the story, some subplots are going to open up, and maybe the 2 subplots that I have, they might close and they might not be as strong as these other subplots that might be popping up. We're going to focus mainly on the main plot of this story. Using Brandon Sanderson's outline and some of his notes, that's how we're going to work on outlining the main plot of the story. We talked about making sure that we nail down the beginning of the story, where we want it to start officially, page 1, and then where I want the story to end. That's everything that we have to be working on, which is a lot. We have a lot that we need to work on today and tomorrow. So we have 2 days to work on all of that. I do have another list of everything, and these are all of the things that I need to get done before my deadline next Saturday. Briefly go over them. I think a lot of this stuff we're going to be able to check off today or at least tomorrow, and then wrap up everything else as we lead up to next week. I want to continue to work on the main characters, secondary characters, side characters, the relationship between all of these characters, the world before this novel, meaning where was the world before this story actually started, the government, where does this take place, is it just a territory, the entire world, a state, what's the layout of the land, the main plot, some of the subplots, the beginning, the opening of the actual story, the middle, we can keep it vague, connect the dotser, V.E. Schwab way. The ending, we need to make sure that this is a very, very good understanding of how the story is going to end. But what is the society like? What is this competition that I keep talking about, and its importance to the story? So those are all the things that we are going to be working on today, tomorrow, and leading up to the deadline, which is next Saturday, April 9th. So we have a lot that we need to do. I am going to continue to work through all of this written out, probably look at that 7th scene and probably write that out. I'll let you know about the word count and how I feel about that scene and a little bit of where the story went for that. For the most part, that's what we're going to be working on. I will check in with you guys once we make some progress and tell you how it's going. One quick thing before we actually dive in. I have to get resubmerged into the story. I bring up my Pinterest board, go through all of my pins. Sometimes I'll listen to the playlist that I made last week, try to get into the headspace. I usually do reread all of the notes that I took for the last couple the last couple of days, and all of the notes that I took to remember where I was, where we were trying to go with this. Reread some of the notes that I took in my textbooks, craft books as well, and then the notes that I took in Brandon Sanderson's lecture. I usually reread everything that I did the week before to remember where my mindset was, what I was thinking that the story needed, where we were going to go. Reread some of the scenes, just briefly go over some of those scenes that I wrote in the Google Doc. But that's what we're going to start out doing, and then we are going to plot character arcs, side characters, the world building, outlining the ending, and finish using Story Genius to discover my main character.
You look at me like I'm crazy when I shut my feelings out. You look at me like I'm different, still you stay cause you feel something real. Get so lost in my moments, doesn't mean I don't need you. I fell in love with your colors, they kinda tell me what I'm thinking. I fell in love with the way we are and the way we lose it. There's something different about us, and the reason why we stay. We fly around like paper planes, they never know where we will fall. Nobody.
I've been going at this for about an hour. I reread everything from last week's vlog, what I was working on between the two vlogs. At first I wasn't 100% sure that her desire and her fear, that misbelief, at first I wasn't 100% sure it was what I wanted, what I was going for, or if it made sense for the story. I wrote down another potential belief and fear that I thought maybe would be better fitting for the story. But as I was writing it out, I wasn't quite sure if I liked that one. I did a little bit of reading in Story Genius. I read back a couple of pages from where I had left off just to see where exactly I was headed. It's taken me a little bit longer to get into this writing session than the last few days. I think the original one that I had last week, the desire, the misbelief, I think it's fine. I think what I had originally is okay for now. It can always change, it can always improve, it can always get a little bit stronger, or maybe just shift a little bit. So we're going to keep going on with what I wrote last week. I'm keeping what I wrote today, and I'm going to put a note to say, I thought that I may have wanted this desire and this misbelief, but now I'm not sure. I think we're gonna just keep the original one that we had. There was another lie. One of the characters, they're not necessarily in the story, but they're a big motivator for Norel. One of her family members goes missing, so she's trying to figure out why, which is why she gets into this whole ordeal in the first place. She's trying to find this person or try to figure out what happened to them on her own. She thinks it's on her own, and then she makes deals and things get out of hand. But then I was thinking the reason this person went missing, their reasons may fall parallel with Norel's. It might be like a circle. We might figure out what happened to that person, everything, because that's what's going to be happening to Norel. And the reason I'm thinking this is because it's a corrupt government. There's a lot of interesting things that are happening behind the scenes, but thinking that what Norel was told about this character disappearing is not in fact the truth, and maybe she finds it out too late. I also was working on the origin scene. The origin scene being where her fear grew, where that came from, the source of that fire. It took me a little bit of time to figure out the origin scene because I wasn't sure if I wanted it to go off of the fear, the misbelief that I just wrote now, or if I wanted it to go off of the original one that I had written last week. So I was going through that. I had put some notes on things that could potentially be an origin scene as to how she got this misbelief, and I really liked the notes that I had jotted down for that. I took that and I ran with it. I wrote the origin scene. I didn't write it word for word of what exactly happened, but I did write down that it happened in her childhood. She wasn't listening as kids do, and she went out on her own, but then discovered something, some tragic act was happening that she witnessed. So I feel like that's a big thing to happen to a child, first of all. But I think that's a big thing to drive that misbelief that she's going to have. We're going to continue with Story Genius. I'm on chapter 7 of Act 2. I'm on page 105, and part 2 ends at 144. So I have about 40 pages. I think we're going to work on finishing Act 2. I want to move on to working on the plot. So I can move away from Norelle, her backstory, start working on the plot, start working on her character arc, knowing all of this information. There's a few things that I just wanted to mention before we get back into outlining. I need to also write that scene 7. As I was working on these scenes, there were a few world building things that I wanted to work on that are about this government. I feel like I've made a lot of progress working on this government, even though I haven't specifically started the world building on it, which I'm pretty happy about. Learning about Norelle's background, where she came from, how people treat her, just in her backstory, that says a lot about her government, her kingdom, where exactly she is in her life. Love it.
Pouring cup after cup after cup. Yeah, it's just the way we do it. Anything just to block out the real life.
I'm still reading through Story Genius, comparing everything that I've written in the past, what I'm writing now. I've gotten settled into the story now. I think I found my way back. It took me a little bit longer than I actually thought it would have to get into the story. I'm reading through, and we were talking about that origin scene, that scene that plants the seed for that misbelief, and comparing it to when we go through life and if we want something but we just can't have it. She gave the example of wanting a pony, and obviously you couldn't have a pony because you didn't have the space. It doesn't just automatically snuff out what you want. The same goes with the desire. Her misbelief is, it slowly was like, you know, that one little scene, that one thing that happened in her past. But now it's going to branch out and affect everything in her life. So whatever this misbelief was, whatever this origin scene was, it was the seed to creating a whole bunch of issues, which is going to create, as the lovely Brandon Sanderson would have said, would be that flaw. It started out as a problem, a small minor problem, the misbelief, and now it's a flaw, a problem, a big deal that has wildly spread out of hand. I'm still working on her backstory, still working towards trying to finish the second part of Story Genius, which is my character's backstory, and then we will move forward. So we're finally making some progress today.
Even if what we're doing is bad, there's so many emotions, sharing stories that we never had, yeah, none is real. We're searching for reasons not to be like this.
It is a little past 6:15. I am sitting here getting ready for my live stream in about 45 minutes. I ended up taking a little break. I took an hour nap, and then I made some sweet potato french fries, which were amazing. So now I think I want to work a little bit more before we go live. But let me talk about what I was working on after my origin scene. I focused working on the cause and effect of the story. I was listening to Brandon Sanderson talk about, I believe it was in Save the Cat and Story Genius, where it talked about cause and effect. The whole story is a cause and effect, as well as each scene, each chapter, each page should be a cause and effect. So you should enter expecting one thing, but then maybe twist it and then you get something else that happens, where maybe the main character thinks like, oh, it's just gonna be a quick snatch and grab or whatever. That's what they're going into, but then maybe something else happens and that doesn't quite work out. So then it changes what happens in the story. I took some notes using Story Genius. I was doing some highlighting, and that was chapter 7. So we're on chapter 8 now. And I wrote down on an internal level what she is exactly going through, and then on an external level, so how are the other characters going to be affected by everything that happens in the story. So I ended up working on those scenes that led up to the story, that led up to the very first page. The exercise in the 7th chapter, I had to work on a minimum of at least 3 turning point scenes that happened in order to lead up to the very start of the story. The author did talk about some people, like us writers, we are the some people. Once we get that origin scene, we just want to go ahead and jump straight into the story. We want to jump into that very first page because we think that now that we have our origin scene, we're ready to go. But she wanted us to, me, the reader, also the author, the writer, she wanted us to pull back on the reins a little bit and then think about what exactly happened between that origin scene and then that very start of the book. For me, with my story, I'm thinking about her origin scene takes place when she witnesses some type of tragic event that is happening to a family member. It shapes her and her mindset. So then when the book starts, I have a scene where she is meeting this mysterious person, aka the devil, which is where we get the reference to Addie LaRue. She is in the process of meeting with this person as like pretty much the last hope. She doesn't know what else to do. She's at the end of the rope. I had to create 3 scenes to build up to her point of thinking that the only thing left to do is to talk to this mysterious stranger to get them to help her to save her skin, but also to find this person that she's been missing. The 3 scenes that led up to that, I wrote them in chronological order. So the first one took place a few years later, where my main character was trying to get into the academy for the military, because that's where the story is really taking place. But my character wasn't quite sure she was going to make the cut. So she broke in, stole some of the papers. The second scene that I created, she was supposed to be competing up against this person who's a much stronger, bigger, more agile person. Her physical ability up against this other character, she does not stand a chance. So she does something to sabotage him so then they don't fight. So then she just gets a free pass. And then the third scene, she's a little bit older. She gets caught doing something after hours or when she's supposed to be on guard duty. She is getting threatened to get exposed that this was happening. So then she tried to smooth it over and did whatever she was supposed to do for this person to keep quiet, but then the person still ended up turning her in anyways. So then she is like on the verge of getting kicked out of the academy. And then here we are, the story is starting where she has her last hope and she's about to make the deal. So now I'm going to continue working through part 2 of Story Genius, and that's pretty much where we're going to end with my main character. And then we're going to work on her character arcs. We're going to switch gears and focus more on Brandon Sanderson's lectures, using what I have already done, building her character arc, revisit her desires, the flaws. I do want to work on some of the secondary characters today. They're not going to be as in-depth as my main character. Some of them might be. I might have to make them a little more in-depth in order to understand their characters. But for the most part, what I've done with her, I don't think I'm going to mimic this quite so much for all the other characters. I'll check in with you later. We have about 15 minutes left of our final sprint, so it's almost about 10 o'clock at night. I have finished everything for going through Story Genius for part 2, anything and everything that I wanted from part 2, working on my main character. I feel very confident about where I'm sitting with my main character. Instead of 3 turning points, I threw in a 4th one that was just slightly different. So I had the 3 that pushed it towards a negative direction. I came up with a 4th point or a 4th thing that would happen in the story that would be beneficial and that would show something positive. Everything was always negative, so I wanted to give at least 1, maybe 2 positives once I start writing the story. After that, I walked through some of the ideas that I had for the main problem of the story. I have 5 problems that I wrote out a general gist of the idea. For these problems, I think the one that would make the most sense was the one that I felt like I was always kind of leaning towards this being the main problem. I do like the other 4 ideas that I have, so I don't think they're going to completely go to waste. I think they might be able to be subplots or weaved in there somewhere, but we're going to keep them. They're written in my notebook. We're just going to hold on to them for the time being. Now we are going to use Brandon Sanderson's notes to plot out my story. I need to run through all of the notes again. He had a really nice breakdown in one of his lectures about character, plot, and setting. I want to focus on that. So let's see what I can get done now. I will probably update you guys tomorrow on what I finished for the rest of today. So I'll see you there. It is the next day, Saturday, April 2nd. I want to circle back and tell you guys what I was working on and what I accomplished during the live stream last night. Y'all, we did 3 30-minute sprints and 1 25-minute sprint. We were booking it last night. So I was able to finish a lot of stuff last night during our stream, which was awesome. I think I'm still maybe about half a day behind where I would like to be to try to stay on track to reach my deadline of next Saturday. But even if I don't finish everything by the exact day, a couple of days before, a couple of days after, it's fine. We just want to make sure we keep moving forward. So I ended up finishing Story Genius, and in our last sprint last night, I began going through my notes for everything that I took listening to Brandon Sanderson's lectures. I've only listened to the first 3. I started reading through. I'm on promises and what he talks about promises. I'm starting to plot out my story officially. I feel very good about this. I think we're making pretty good progress. I feel like I can see and feel the beginning really well. And I feel like I understand where the story is going to end, at least for the first draft, just to get the idea written out. I feel like I have a good understanding of the beginning and the ending. I think we're going to spend a little bit more time trying to figure out how to get to the ending. But I do have some ideas, some plot points that could potentially be helpful for connecting the dots. Right now, we're going to work on character arcs for my main character, slowly work on those other 2 main characters / secondary characters, those 2 guys, and continue to work out the plot.
Like paper planes, they never know where we will fall. Nobody can see it, still they wanna tear us apart. There's something different about the way we are. There's something different about us.
I wrote out the 4 turning points and then a few bullet points underneath them of things that would happen around this time, either leading up to that big turning point, that big plot point of the story, or what happens after, like directly after. And then on this page, I had to write it sideways. I used Brandon Sanderson's lecture and how he says that he starts doing his outline. So I have a category for the characters, setting, and the plot. And I wrote down all of the characters that I have so far in those scenes that I have wrote down. I still think there are a few more people I need to write down, but they should come clearer the more I write. And then I wrote down those plot points that I have on the other page. I briefly just wrote those. Any of the other plot points that I think could potentially be used in the story. And I wrote a little bit about the setting because I have an idea for the setting. I want it to be just a little bit different. And then flipping the page, I had an idea for conflict between the main character and then one of the secondary characters. So I wrote that down before I forgot, going over my main character's character arc. I wasn't quite sure about her desire and her misbelief. And I got nervous because I thought that maybe I had messed up somewhere. I don't think it's strong enough, but we're going to keep moving forward. As we keep moving forward, it might fizzle down to what I need it to be. I have the main character's character arc done, sort of. I sort of have it. I have her misbelief and her desire, but I haven't plotted it quite out all the way. I don't think. We might have to keep working on it. But it might be fine for now and what I'm trying to do. So we're going to keep pushing forward.
There's something different about the way we are. There's something different about the way we are.
I have been outlining backwards, which means I have my ending bullet pointed out, what I feel good about, and how I did this using all of the plot points that I wrote earlier and the way that I wanted the story to go, and using the main plot that I wanted of the story. I wrote that out because according to Brandon Sanderson, you have the promises. So what I promised at the beginning, I need to make sure I have a payoff for that. And I do, which is very satisfying. At the beginning, she makes the deal. I jotted down what came about of that deal as the ending. There was the mystery that was around why she made this deal, so who she was trying to find. There is some type of romance. I'm not a big romance person, so if you're one of my writing friends and you're reading this, you're probably jumping up with joy because Autumn does not write about romance. Autumn does not read about romance. So the fact that I have something in here of a subplot getting wrapped up and it's a romance subplot, that's a pretty big deal for me. I feel very good about outlining this ending. I think I did 2 or 3 bullet points under whatever that plot point was. Holy moly, you guys. I'm sorry, but we're kicking it. I feel really good about this story right now. I need to go back and work on the secondary characters, do world building. What else do I have on this list? Talk about the government, the politics, and that competition that I've been talking to you guys about. I need to work on the side characters, so secondary characters. And I have yet to write scene 7. That scene that's been brewing in my mind, it's still brewing. It's still up there, just patiently waiting for me to put my fingers on the keyboard and write it. But I feel much more confident about reaching that loose deadline I set for myself for next Saturday. That's all I have for you guys for today. I thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it and you want to see more content, go ahead and hit the big red subscribe button. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.